we want to talk now about the world economy and how it impacts the poorer countries, the developing part of the world. And so, Mike, can I ask you and then Joe to say a little bit about how the world economy hinders and promotes the prospects of the developing world?
Yeah, John, I think this is a good example of where theoretical perspectives are very useful. Not necessarily because any one of them is entirely right, but because they'll help students to position a debate and understand the kind of assumptions people use. And let me just briefly suggest two. Both of them are somewhat extreme on this question. The kind of ideal type liberal economic theory suggests that everyone benefits from economic interdependence and trade. Some may benefit more than others, but everyone is going to do better. At the other extreme, there's a set of theories that come out of the Marxist tradition. They're called dependency theories, which suggested that the world economy was essentially exploitative, and it was very difficult for any developing state to actually emerge and prosper because the system was essentially rigged against them. I think the evidence has shown over time that neither of these perspectives are entirely true. In fact, what we've seen is a multiplicity of outcomes. We see certain countries, East Asian countries, for example, which have prospered greatly by engaging into the world economy. We see other countries that have engaged. You can think of Middle Eastern oil producers, but for various reasons, some international, perhaps some domestic, have not. So this is a great question for students because there's interesting variation in the outcomes across states, and the great challenge is to figure out why, what actually creates development and prosperity.
Yes,
Joe?
I concur with Mike's very useful delineation of the two perspectives and how neither is likely to be fully accurate. I think the precisely because there has been such good performance on a significant number of countries, especially in East Asia, but now in the last 10 years, the remarkably better performance of India. I think this is, and we highlight this in the book, the important and sustained improved growth trajectory of India in the last 10 years is something really quite remarkable, and I think many scholars or observers did not anticipate 20 years ago that India would reach that 6%, for example, growth rate, beginning to approach the growth rate of China. And so, and this has been in conjunction with liberalization of the Indian economy, both in terms of domestic markets as well as participation in the global economy. On the other hand, the problems of many of the middle income countries of Latin America, for example, which has not been fabulous, and the persistence of booms and busts in the financial side in many countries where foreign capital comes in. This leads to an overstimulation of the economy, a fear on the part of residents that their currency may depreciate, then they want to sell, and all of a sudden there's a balance of payments crisis, there's a crisis in the real estate market, in the stock markets, sometimes a requirement for a bailout by the International Monetary Fund with sometimes quite onerous conditions. There are risks as well as rewards from integration in the world economy for many developing countries. I would add one other positive note that we point to is that there has been an important turnaround in the economic situation of many countries in sub-Saharan Africa after a solid 2 decades of difficulty of growth that indeed was producing a decline in per capita income. There's actually, in the last 10 years or so, been an inflection, turning and a growth in per capita income that's in some cases quite important. So India, I think, China was the great breakthrough country in terms of showing that economic integration works. India, I think, reinforces that point. Sub-Saharan Africa, there's some interesting positive developments, but there are still parts of the world that underscore that there can, especially on the financial side, risks. And so governments individually and collectively have to work to maximize those benefits while managing risks.
And then I would just add that one way to think about this question is to link the international environment to domestic politics and economics. It's very important, and we try to do this throughout the textbook, which is to say that a state's growth prospects are going to depend not only on how and the extent to which it integrates into the world economy, but also its domestic political and economic environment. And maybe, Joe, you might want to say a couple things.
Yes,
about that.
China's great advance began in 1978 with domestic market liberalization. It was then fortified by efforts to have somewhat stronger enforcement of contracts and other elements of rule of law as they pertain to commercial activities. Similar reforms were undertaken in 1991, 1992 in India, and set the stage for integration in the world economy and the success we've seen in recent years. The Millennium Development Program worked very hard in sub-Saharan Africa to improve national governance, which then was translated, I think, into the very promising several recent years of growth. Turning then to Asia, we see very much this vivid importance of domestic liberalization and better governance by contrasting, for example, the amazing success of a country like South Korea or Singapore, both of which are very strongly good governance overall countries and economic development. And unfortunately, on the other side of that ledger would be the Philippines, where we have not seen good governance and movement towards good governance, where contracts are enforced, corruption is reduced and is not embedded in the day-to-day life of government at almost every level, local and national. And that has, I think, served as a constraint on Philippine national economic development in a region where we see generally good development.
Yeah, I think you can make a similar case about Russia.
Yes.
Crony capitalism and an oligarchic style of economic development has actually constrained the overall growth of the economy, even though a small number of people have gotten exceedingly rich.